But I want to start with a video this morning, a video that I made for you. I want you to see how funny our students are. So on Wednesday night, I filmed a bunch of them telling jokes. And so here is some fun from comedy night.
Yeah, broccoli.
Because Elsa let it go.
Because there was a car in the way.
A pork chop!
You kill his family. Because he's so cheesy.
Chocolate muffin!
Your thing.
Because I got stuck in a crack.
Nothing. It just waved.
And one cannibal says, "Does this taste funny to you?"
El pesimisto.
So, which joke did you think was the funniest? Anyone notice anything weird about these jokes? Yeah, they're only punchlines. They're only punchlines. I'm curious. What is it like? Oh, I forgot to send our kids out. Tim's got him though. So if you have a 4-year-old to first grader, this is the time they get to go hang out. We've been doing this long enough that I should not have forgotten that. I was really excited about the jokes. It's true. It's real excited to show you. I'm curious. Like, what's it like listening to only punchlines? Anybody? What was your experience of listening to those jokes? Doesn't make sense. Trying to figure out what the joke is? Maybe like, oh, you can like work back and, sort of reconstruct it. I like that. Anyone else? It's kind of hysterical to watch Alex's reaction to his joke. Right at the end, like he really enjoyed that one Spanish word. And I didn't know what the word was, but he was having a good time. The setup for a joke, it doesn't have to be long. And none of those jokes had long setups, right? But it is the story, like the context that makes the punchline land, right? It's the setup, it's the story that allows you to delight in the punchline. 2 people were walking down the road. One was assaulted. This is a story, right? It's a very short story. But change one word to the setup, and you set the stage. My daughter's laughing because we all know that this is my favorite joke. And you set the stage for one of my favorite jokes. 2 peanuts were walking down the road. One was assaulted. So good. Thanks for enjoying either the joke or me enjoying the joke. It's not clear which was happening there, right? But the setup matters, right? It establishes your expectations. It creates this framework for hearing what comes next. It's what allows the punchline to shock or to surprise. In a few verses after what we just heard Kate read for us, Jesus is going to say, "And I say to you that everyone who is angry with his brother will be liable to judgment. Whoever insults his brother will be liable to the council. And whoever says, 'fool,' will be liable to the Gehenna of fire." Now, this isn't a joke, but Jesus is giving the punchline that God started to set up more than 1,000 years earlier. On a mountain, a man named Moses met with God, and at the foot of that mountain stood an entire nation, saved, released from bitter slavery. They are here to meet with their God, their rescuer. And up on that mountain, God gives Moses a message to give to the people. And he says, you shall be my treasured possession among all peoples. Right? You shall be to me a kingdom of priests and a holy nation. God will go on to say, I am Yahweh, who brought you up out of the land of Egypt to be your God. You shall therefore be holy, for I am holy. God's words are pretty straightforward here. He tells them his personal name. The Israelites at the foot of the mountain are told that they are supposed to be like their God who is up on the top of the mountain. And as a people, they will live their lives acting like their God, because their job, their role in the world is to show the world what their God is like. That is what it means that they are to be holy and that they are to be priests. They are to be like their God in some particular ways, and they are to show off what God is like. And we find here that they are treasured by God. They are a holy people, and they are to be priests in the world. And so in a profound way, God has given them their identity. He's given them the sense of belonging. He's given them this purpose. This is all kind of high-level stuff. But then he starts to get really specific, and Yahweh tells Moses, Yahweh is a God who is slow to anger. And Moses actually gets to see God get angry. He gets to see what makes God angry. And Moses also gets to see God in his anger take a beat and cool down and not lash out at his people in anger. And then we also get to see the difference between God and one of his maybe holiest priests, Moses, where God is slow to get angry and then can cool down and act in accordance with his character. Moses gets angry and he acts out on that anger, not once, but we see it multiple times. And so we get this sense that anger is pretty tough for humans to deal with. We need a pretty radical heart transformation to not lash out in anger at people around us when they've made us angry. And so there on that mountain, Yahweh, he doesn't tell his brand new followers, don't get angry. That would be impossible for them in that moment. But he meets them right where they are at. And he simply says, don't murder. Right? Like he assumes they are going to get angry, and he puts limits on their anger. But at that moment, he doesn't demand more from them. At least not yet. More than 1,000 years later, Jesus will then say to a crowd of Israelites, you have heard it was said to those of old. And you can immediately imagine those who are gathered around that mountain. You shall not murder. And with this one sentence, Jesus draws on the entire Torah and prophets to set up this punchline. You have heard it said, and I say to you, anyone who is angry with his brother will be liable to judgment. Think for a second about the video we watched a few minutes ago. Scarlett's hands in the air shouting, a pork chop! Or Anna, with her heavy emphasis on a car in the way, or Alex's ridiculous laugh. None of these reactions mean anything to us. Even though, right, they're speaking words that we understand, if you understand Spanish, but even sentences, right, that make sense. They're coherent sentences, but their reactions are strange without the setup. The punchlines just don't land for us, and we don't have the same experience, the same reaction as the joke teller. I want to make the case that this is how most American Christians experience Jesus. We hear Jesus as the punchline of a joke that we have no setup for. We recognize his name, right? Like we know some stuff about him, so there is a coherence to him, but we have almost none of the setup that makes him make real sense in our lives and in the world. The punchline comes, Jesus is the Son of God, but we have almost no idea what it means for Jesus to be, for a human to be the Son of God, because this is all language that's developed in the first 3/4 of the Bible. We hear that Jesus is Lord and Savior, but we have so little context for what either of these words really mean. Like what does Jesus save us from? And what does he save us for? And what does it mean to call him Lord? It might feel like I'm being a little dramatic or even a little unfair, right? By claiming most American Christians experience Jesus this way. I don't want to minimize the real relationship that people have with Jesus. But I also don't think it's controversial to point out that we have real relationships with people all the time who we never really go deeper with. Like even people that we care a lot about, we can easily just assume that we already know everything about them. My sister, Erin, and I, right? We've known each other as of last week for 40 years. We're close. We're really close. We've been close for a really long time. And it would be really easy for us to just sort of assume that we have each other figured out. Because 40 years is a long time to know a person. But a couple weeks ago, I was on a longer drive, and we were on the phone together. And Jack, her son, was with his dad, and so neither of us were really in a rush, and so we just kind of lingered on the phone, and we had this conversation that went deeper than we normally go, and it just reminded me that there are still whole parts of my sister's life. She lives around the corner from me. We see her all the time, and there are these whole parts of her life and her experiences and the way that she's thinking about what she's been through that I just don't know. And it's not like she's hiding those from me. It's just that I haven't asked. But on the phone, on this drive where I wasn't rushed, I asked some questions. And I learned so much about her. Like I grew in my respect for her. I understood her just a little bit better. You probably know this, right? It's easy to settle into this place with our most familiar relationships, where we assume we know everything that there is to know about this other person or these people that we care about. But there is always more. And this is usually obvious to us in our newer or like less familiar relationships. Just this last week, I ran into one of Jane's old students who is now an adult with a kid. And we've known each other for a while and have always been friendly, but we've never really talked much. But she's going through some stuff. And she has some questions about God and faith. And so when she saw me at a middle school volleyball game, she remembered that I was a pastor, and she said she wanted to talk. And in just a few minutes, right, she told me what she'd been going through this year. She told me her questions, and I immediately recognized I don't have enough information. I don't have enough understanding of what she had been through to give her anything helpful. And so it felt like in that brief moment, she gave me the punchline of her life, but I needed the setup to make any sense of it. And this volleyball game wasn't really the place to ask more questions. And so we made a plan to meet up so I could hear more and hopefully offer her something that would be helpful. Why would I say most American Christians experience Jesus as this punchline that we don't have the setup for? Because most American Christians have almost no real familiarity with the part of the Bible Jesus calls the Torah and the prophets. We typically refer to this part of the Bible as the Old Testament. You'll sometimes hear me call it the First Testament or even the Hebrew Bible. Because in a recent Lifeway survey, only 80% of Americans have ever read the entire Bible. And if you consider the number of Americans who count themselves as Christians, and there are then a lot of American Christians who have never read the Bible all the way through, even once. In a different study, a recent Pew Research survey, atheists and agnostics, right, those who say, I do not believe in God, I do not know whether God exists or not. This group, atheists and agnostics, was better informed than American Christians about the contents of the Bible. Hebrew Bible scholar Brent Strawn did a review of sermons from the 1900s, and even though the Hebrew Bible is 78% of the whole Bible, only 21% of all sermons he reviewed came from Hebrew Bible texts. In fact, there were more sermons preached in his review with no biblical text than there were sermons using the Hebrew Bible. There are multiple organizations that have lamented the lack of Bible literacy among American Christians. Drew Johnson, another Hebrew Bible scholar, says the answer actually isn't better biblical literacy. Biblical literacy is often measured with quizzes and tests that only tell you, can tell if you know the names and the dates and the places and Bible facts, like how many disciples were there or how many books in the Bible are there. And Bible literacy isn't bad. It can tell us something about a person's engagement with the Bible, but we often stop there. Imagine you're trying to learn a language. Imagine that Jane is your French teacher, and you can pass every vocab test that she gives you. You ace her grammar tests. Abigail. This is Abigail.
She did ace most.
I know. She often fixed Jane's grammar mistakes. Of which there were few. But so this hypothetical is, more real than not. But imagine, right? You've been in this French class, and you can use a bunch of simple phrases that you've memorized for certain times and places. Maybe you can even read French well enough to get around the country. This is a kind of literacy, and it's great. It's a great starting place. Drew Johnson argues that many Christian organizations are trying to get us to this level of Bible literacy. But Drew wants to push us further. He thinks that we ought to be fluent in the Torah and the prophets, not merely literate in them. I want to know the difference between Bible fluency and where we are at. In the Gospels, when Jesus tells a parable or he uses some sort of illustration, he is almost always drawing from some passage in the Hebrew Bible. Jesus uses the Hebrew Bible to help people understand his teachings. And all he has to do is say a word or a phrase, and immediately, right, his audience knows exactly what he's talking about. It's like if I were to say, be all that you can be in the army. You guys finished that sentence for me, right? You knew the setup and the punchline. The few, the proud, the Marines. I love what you do for me. Come on, Alex, that was you. I set that one up. Alex loves Toyota a lot. Well, like maybe too much? No. Okay, there are some things money can't buy. For everything else, there's MasterCard. Right there, like this actually isn't just trivia. This is formation. Like these organizations have been marketing to us. They have been forming us since we were kids. Their values, their ideas, their slogans are in us. So that like with a word, with a tune, with a phrase, right, I can immediately take you somewhere knowing that you all are fluent in our culture's advertising. For the most part, like if I reference something from the Hebrew Bible, I know that I actually am gonna have to explain it before I can help us understand what Jesus might be doing with it, or how Jesus might be the fulfillment of it. In some ways, one of my projects over the last almost 13 years has been to instill a level of Bible fluency among us. And the only way to get there is by reading and rereading and rereading and rereading and asking questions and wrestling with these texts that for Jesus and for his earliest followers were in them. Right, but here's the thing about this. Like nobody gets fluent in a language by taking Jane's language class. Sorry, Jane. Right? Nobody gets fluent by going to class and completing all of the assignments given by someone else. Jane became fluent in French when she went to Quebec and she chose to do the hard work of immersing herself in a language. She maintained fluency as she played with the language and used it on her own. And in those seasons where she hasn't been invested in the language, she would tell you that she's lost some of her fluency over time, become less familiar with it. And the same is true of us. If we only ever read what somebody tells us to read, like we'll gain literacy, we'll get the details, we'll pick up facts, but we'll never get to fluency, this place where the language is in us. Jane once described becoming fluent in French. There was a moment where she started to dream in French. That is maybe one way of thinking about this transition from literacy to fluency. Fluency comes when I'm not the one telling you to read Genesis, but you want to know God better and you have your own questions about God, and so you pick up your own reading plan, or maybe one that I created or somebody else, and you invite others to read with you because you have to get these questions answered, right? Where reading can't just be an assignment, a thing to check off a daily list. It's gotta be this deeper dive into the setup, because you just want to get the punchline. You want to get Jesus. It's the thing you do because you desperately want to know Jesus and understand this Jesus who has declared his love for you. We can say things like, the Bible is God-breathed. It's inspired by God. It is authoritative. But in practical terms, American Christians often can live as though the very Bible that Jesus and his disciples read and meditated on and heard and listened to and were fluent in doesn't even exist. And so, what does it look like? What would it look like for the rest of this year as we read the Sermon on the Mount together to recognize that there is something of the Sermon on the Mount that we hear it and we hear people talk about it with enthusiasm and excitement. And we're like, oh, this is the good stuff. But what would happen if we recognize that the Sermon on the Mount in so many ways is the punchline for a joke that we've missed the setup for? What kind of invitation is God offering you this year to dive deeper into that setup? Where could you start? Where would you want to start? Our God is calling to us in the Torah and the prophets, and Jesus is eager to be better understood by us. And as a test, passing or failing isn't a serious thing in this moment. And so I know I said test and some of you got real anxious. But as a test of your Bible fluency this morning, you might just consider the meal that we're about to eat together. Maybe you recognize this event from the Gospels. Maybe you recognize the words that Jesus speaks. Chances are good you do because we repeat them every week. But to what extent do you realize that this meal is another punchline for a whole setup before it? It's a powerful punchline. There is so much more setup that makes this time and our gathering around this table and our eating and our drinking together a beautiful, holy, mysterious moment. And I just ask you, to what extent do you get what is happening as we come around the table? And if you're hungry to get it more and deeper, I would love to help show you where you can find the setup.